All right, welcome back everyone to our Azure Integration Services Day. So I'm going to be passing this off to Mike to give us a little chat about API management.
Thank you, Alex. My name is Mike Budzinski. I'm a Senior Product Manager for Azure API Management. I hope we have API Management fans or at least users in the chat. So if you have ever used API Management, let us know and also keep the questions coming. So today we'll talk about a few topics. First, we'll dive deeper into the recently released features of Azure API Management. That includes pricing tiers v2, Defender for APIs, support for GRPC and OData APIs, Microsoft Copilot, and Credential Manager. And then we'll wrap it up with the benefits of using Azure API Management with OpenAI APIs and some tips and tricks for practical use cases. So I'll hand it over to my colleague Fernando Mejia to talk about the pricing tiers.
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me there?
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
hear you.
perfect. So hello, everyone. So we have just introduced new pricing tiers, but these new pricing tiers come with new exciting features and quality of life improvements that you have asked for a long time. Basically, we're going to we introduced two tiers in public preview in the last month, basic V2 preview. So this tier is, it will have the developer portal, basic APIs, API policies, and everything that you know and love. One difference here is that it will have some kind of VNet, in this case, private link. We also have the standard V2, and I think this new tier is the main highlight because it will have all the features that normally were in the premium tier, like VNet integration, private link, availability zones, multi-region, and also self-hosted gateway. This
Fernando, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So standard V2, I would say, is the main highlight, which introduced cheaper VNet for you. And also for the next year, we're going to introduce the premium V2, which also will have VNet injection, which is going to be enhanced. You don't need to open the traffic, the network security groups to our own dependencies for API management, so it will be easier to use. And of course, it will have the most performance of all the new tiers. Some limitations and considerations that you have to be aware is that these new tiers are only available in a subset of regions. Also, some of these new tiers will contain a cap, a limit on the number of API requests that you can do, except for Premium V2. And also for now, switching or doing like a vertical scaling, changing from a V1 tier to a V2 tier will not be possible until.
Fernando, we lost your voice again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's some issue with my headset. Yeah, and just finally, do not confuse this V2 tiers, what we call so the STV2 compute platform. They're completely different things. So hopefully you can you can use these new tiers, especially the standard V2, and we're looking for your feedback. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Fernando. If you have any questions about pricing tiers V2, please post them in the chat, and then we'll either answer in the chat or at the end if we have time in person. Moving on, the next feature that we are going to talk about is Defender for APIs. Defender for APIs is a new service in Azure. It's part of Microsoft Defender for Cloud. It's an advanced API security solution that's tailored to providing API security capabilities, protection, and features. It allows you to better prevent, detect, and respond to API security threats in your API management services, and the core capabilities fall into three main categories. The first one is the classification and understanding the security posture of your APIs and your API management services. And that includes a unified security overview of all your APIs across all your API management services and subscriptions from the security standpoint. It also includes a detection of endpoints that don't have authentication in place, that are inactive, and therefore just increase the potential surface attack, and also endpoints that are externally exposed, so potentially more vulnerable or with higher risk to your organization. It also includes sensitive data classification, so things like social security numbers. You will be able to identify the endpoints that transfer those sensitive details. The second category is around hardening API configurations and prioritizing risk remediation. So once you discover where the problems lie, we can help you prioritize remediation of those problems to make sure that you wisely allocate your investments and resources. And lastly, probably the most exciting part of Defender for APIs is the ability to monitor and protect APIs against attacks in runtime. And that's based on machine learning models that model several top attack vectors, such as broken object level authorization, that work on your endpoints and adapt to your traffic and are able to detect attacks that are happening on your APIs. And then it can also integrate with other security solutions like Microsoft Sentinel for alerts and notifications. And I'll not be diving into this site too deep, but you can refer to it in the recording if you're interested. Basically, the point is that API security is a layered defense. API management provides a lot of capabilities natively that help you better secure APIs and your endpoints. And there are also other complementary services in Azure that also increase the security of your APIs, such as virtual networks, firewall, DDoS protection, and there is also Microsoft Defender for APIs. So if you want the best-in-class security for your APIs, you should consider adopting all of these services to build that security in place. And we have a short demo, so I'll ask Wagner to play the recording. In this short demonstration, we'll take a look at the basic capabilities of Defender for APIs. In this example, I have a user management API in my API management service with two operations for getting users information. I can make a bunch of API calls using Postman to that API, and the API returns a basic data contract with users information, such as a credit card number, credit card code, zip code, and social security number. Note that I'm making calls to an HTTP endpoint, not HTTPS, so not the encrypted protocol, and I'm not using any authentication method, so this API is accessible to everyone on the internet. Back in the Azure portal, I can navigate to the Defender for Cloud Blade to explore the recommendations for my API management service. Defender presents several recommendations, such as, for example, storing secrets not in the name and the values of API management, but in Azure Key Vault. Among those recommendations are also two high severity recommendations. One is that I need to secure API endpoints in my Azure API management with authentication. So just what we demonstrated, that I was able to call the API without any credentials, and that my API should be exposed using only encrypted protocols, such as HTTPS and not pure HTTP. So Defender was able to deduct from the traffic that I have some severe issues when it comes to security of my APIs. I can explore those recommendations in detail in the Defender for Cloud experience and see to how many resources and to which resources they apply to. I can also take a look at the unified inventory of all of my API endpoints from the security standpoint across all the subscriptions onboarded to Defender for Cloud with the Defender for APIs plan. In this case, I have only one subscription filtered, and it has only one API management service with 3 APIs. But if I had 20 API management services, I would see many more APIs. I can also take a look at more details about the endpoints that my API management services contain. In this example, we're calling the user management API, which is an active API because it just received traffic, but it has some endpoints that are unauthenticated and that expose external traffic and that they expose sensitive data. So to investigate further, I can click on those on that API and see that the endpoint that we just called is classified to expose social security numbers and does not require authentication. Lastly, I can use Defender for APIs exploration capabilities to filter endpoints that, for example, are exposed to the internet and expose sensitive data, or endpoints that communicate over unencrypted protocols with unauthenticated API endpoints. So those very basic threats, I can explore them using Defender for APIs queries and search for all of such endpoints across all of my API management services, across all the subscriptions that I have. So very handy feature to ensure the security of your APIs at scale. And first and foremost, we have not demonstrated some of the other API management and Defender for Cloud capabilities, such as the ability to detect anomalies in API traffic and identify attacks that are happening on your APIs. Defender for Cloud creates machine learning models for all of your API endpoints, and then is able to use those machine learning models to detect malicious behaviors, such as users trying to exploit broken authorization mechanisms or exfiltrate data. So all of those capabilities are possible with Defender for APIs, which natively integrates with Azure API Management. Thank you very much. The next exciting feature that we have added to API Management is the policy authoring experience with Microsoft Copilot for Azure. So we are harnessing and leveraging the AI capabilities to help you author, explain, and convert policies in API management. So for example, you can ask the Copilot to generate a specific policy, like a throttling policy or a much more advanced policy, or suggest a policy to solve a certain business use case that you might not even know what policy it maps to. You can also ask Copilot to explain existing policy that might have been authored by someone else in the organization, and you might not fully understand what it does. And lastly, there is also a use case where you might want to, for example, translate some policies from other API management solutions into Azure API management policies, for example, to unify the behavior of APIs across multiple API gateway solutions. So all of these capabilities are possible. All of these use cases are possible with Microsoft Copilot for Azure for authoring policies. And we also have a short demonstration here. So Wagner, I'll ask you to play another demo.
So here I'm in the Azure portal and in the API policy section of API management in the policy editor. And let's imagine I'm a new user and I don't really know what the policies are. I can click this Copilot button and I can ask Copilot to tell me what Azure API management policies are. And Copilot tells me that policies are a collection of statements that are executed on request or response of an API. Now I have this simple API imported to Azure API Management. There are two things I want to configure for this API. First, I want to remove ASP.NET version header from the response. And the second thing is I want to implement rate limiting for this API. Let's use Copilot for that. First, I will ask Copilot to generate a policy with a rate limit of 5 requests per minute. I can copy this policy snippet into my configuration file. Next, let's ask Copilot to generate a policy to remove an ASP.NET version header from the response. Now let's copy this policy snippet into my configuration, save the API, and see how it works. Now when I do a test request one more time, you can see that I don't have ASP.NET version header anymore. Let's send a couple of more requests to see if we have the rate limiting in place. Great, we have all policies we need, and those policies were generated using Microsoft Copilot for Azure. Now, let's imagine a different scenario. I'm someone who is already familiar with Azure API Management, but I have this API which was handed over to me, and I want to understand what's configured in the policy for this API. And while I understand the validate GLBT section, I don't really know what this validate GraphQL request does, so let's ask Copilot to explain it to me. And as you can see, it not only explains what the validate GraphQL request policy does in general, but also provides description for a specific example that we have here. So it shows that we have a maximum size of 100 kilobytes configured for any incoming GraphQL request. We have a maximum query depth configured, and so on. It also says that we have this authorization section, which is used for request authorization, And the first rule that we have in that section is used to reject any request coming to /double_**. But the thing is that it also describes it with the GraphQL context in mind, saying that this is something which is typically used to block access to GraphQL introspection queries. And that is extremely useful to me because I'm not that familiar with GraphQL, but now I understand that this is an important configuration from a security standpoint. And the second authorization rule, which is fairly complex expression, is also explained pretty well. It says that this rule checks if the request is trying to access a specific path, and if so, checks if there is an admin claim in the JWT token in the context variable. And this saves me a lot of time digging through documentation on how to combine validate JWT and validate GraphQL request policies. Now let's imagine a third scenario. I'm currently migrating from another solution, and I have this APG configuration which I want to convert into API management policy. This configuration adds an additional header to the response of my API. So let's see if Copilot can convert this for me. Okay, looks good. Let me copy this into my configuration, save my policy document, and test the API. And we should be able to see a new service header which says hello from API Management. Microsoft Copilot for Azure not only speeds up the ramping up process for those who are new to API management, but also boosts productivity for those who work with API management on a day-to-day basis, and also helps those who are migrating from another solution.
Perfect, thank you, Wagner. So extremely exciting feature. It can really enhance your productivity as a developer, as well as simplify the management and maintenance of your API management platform. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the GRPC APIs. So we've added support for GRPC APIs in self-hosted gateways, and it's currently in preview. What it means that it's a full gRPC support for client streaming, server streaming, and bidirectional streaming calls as well. It of course supports protobuf, and you can basically bring your gRPC APIs into under management and under governance in your API management platform, alongside other APIs such as GraphQL, REST, as well as SOAP. It also means that you can use policies, just like on any other API, to transform the traffic, protect your APIs, secure your APIs, etc. Same with consumption. It means that you can publish your gRPC APIs inside the organization or outside the organization for consumption by developers. So because there are supporting self-hosted gateways, it means that you have a full flexibility to deploy those APIs wherever you want to deploy them. You can deploy them in the Azure cloud, for example, with Azure Kubernetes Service, or you can deploy them in other clouds or on premises in your own Kubernetes clusters. So extremely powerful features for those of you who are interested in cloud-native APIs and gRPC APIs. And slightly related, we also added support for OData APIs, also currently in preview back in the summer. So first and foremost, it's a similar use case where you want to bring another API type under management and governance in your API management platform, alongside now gRPC, REST, SOAP, and GraphQL APIs. And that also includes OData APIs for SAP solutions. So there are a few other improvements coming soon to support for OData APIs, such as Credential Manager for SAP to easier manage authentication authorization. For SAP APIs, one-click import to easy onboard OData APIs from SAP instances, deploy to Azure Center for SAP solutions, and easy creation of OData connectors in Power Automate for consumption of these APIs by Power Apps and Logic Apps. So this is especially interesting for SAP workloads or some other OData workloads. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Julia. And Julia, I think we do have enough time for the demo, so you're welcome to demonstrate it.
Cool. Thank you, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. I think we will be switching back to the slides. Yeah, perfect. So as Mike has mentioned, I will be talking about Credential Manager today. Credential Manager is a new feature in Azure API Management, formerly known as authorizations. And in addition to the rebranding, we also worked on some really exciting new capabilities within Credential Manager, which I will be talking and also showing you today. So super excited for that. Before we jump into the demo, let's talk a little bit about what Credential Manager really is. So Credential Manager is a central repository within your API management instance. You can use it for managing, storing, and controlling access to your API access tokens. And with Credential Manager, you can greatly simplify the process of authentication and authorization. And in particular, with Credential Manager, we will help you with your API access token from the acquisition to caching to refreshment and to the storage of these API tokens. And all of this without having to write a single line of code. So how can you use it, and what are some of the scenarios we see with Credential Manager? We usually talk about two main scenarios. One is an unattended scenario, and the other one is an attended scenario. So what do we mean, or what does we mean with those scenarios? So let's take a look at the unattended scenario. As a first step, we have to do some configuration on the API management portal side. An API manager, for example, configures a new credential provider. After this, a pre-configured connection will get created with an access policy assigned to API management managed identity. And then during runtime, this could then be used, for example, for an Azure function. For example, the Azure function will call our API endpoint and API management. And via our get authorization context policy, we will get the API access token for you from the pre-configured connection, which we configured previously. And then we will attach the token to our API call and get the information we need. I also mentioned the other scenario. The other scenario is our attended scenario. What does the attended scenario look like? So again, some configurations are needed. Again, an API manager configures a credential provider in API management. But this time, only the provider will be configured and not the connection. Because the connection actually gets created when, for example, a user logs into a static web app, because this will then trigger a process of creating a new connection for this user. And then during runtime, a user again triggers our API endpoint, for example, by clicking a button within our static web app. And this will then call our API endpoint in Azure API Management, again, to get our API access token and to attach it to our API call and then retrieve the data we need, but this time based on the user context. So we will get user dedicated data here in this use case scenario. Because we have time for a short little demo, let me show you what this experience looks like in API management. So I'm currently in my API management service instance. Credential Manager can be found on the right here under Credential Manager. Right now, as you can see, I've already went ahead and configured 3 credential providers. You can easily create a new one. And configuring a new credential provider consists of these 2 steps that we talked about. One is the configuration of the credential manager, of the credential provider, and the other one is setting up the connection, which is optional based on whatever scenario fits your use case. So for configuring the credential provider, as long as it's OAuth 2, you're good to go. You're ready to set up your credential provider. We do have a long list of identity providers we currently support, so feel free to pick and choose whatever fits your scenario. So I already went ahead and configured one credential provider here. I'm going to showcase the GitHub unattended scenario here. So how can I see what are some of the connections that I already pre-configured? Because again, for the unattended scenario, you need a pre-configured connection. Here right now, you can see I already created a connection for the user Julia. You can see the status is also it's connected. So this means I have the access token information ready. And whenever I need it, whenever I'm calling my API endpoint, these information can be retrieved. So we talked about the policy. What does this look like? So if I go into my APIs here, and if I click and check out my policy setting, I can see that I'm using my get authorization context policy. I will name and configure what is the credential provider I will be calling, and I will also configure which connection I want to create here. For the unintended scenario, this will of course be dynamic depending on what we are doing, which connection we need. This will look a little bit different, but just to give you an example of what the policy looks like for an unattended scenario here. And last but not least, let me test it. And so we can see that it works. For this, I will hit the test button, send, and perfect, I'm getting 200. This means my access token has been successfully applied to, and I'm ready to get the information I need. I will be handing it back over to you, Mike. We have some links that we can also share with you in case you're interested. Always feel free to reach out to us. And now back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Julia. Could we switch the screen, please? So here are some resources where you can find more information about Credential Manager. Again, those will be available also in the recording, so feel free to take a picture or just watch the recording if you're interested in those links. So very handy feature for really simplifying implementation maintenance of connections to first-party and third-party backend services, and also making sure that those connections are secure. So not only productivity, but also security enhancements. And I want to spend the last 3 minutes, thank you, Julia, talking about API management with OpenAI and why to use API management with OpenAI and some tips and tricks. So again, it's about bringing those OpenAI APIs into API management for enhanced governance, discovery, consumption, right? So again, bring more APIs in your organization for that governance and to make them consumable by developers, either within your organization, which is usually the use case, or outside your organization. And by bringing those APIs to API management, you can also add security measures to better protect those OpenAI backends and also better protect those endpoints. And that can include improved authentication authorization mechanisms, especially using the developer identity. That can include the rate limiting of API calls to make sure that those OpenAI backends are not bombarded with requests. And that can also include, for example, threat detection with Defender for APIs for much more advanced protection than just rate limiting, right? So API Management can provide a very powerful layer of security on top of OpenAI backends. It can also provide a layer of observability on top of OpenAI backends. So you can log API requests and perform analysis of token consumption across teams in your organization, or even create event-based alerts, for example, when there's an excessive token consumption. And lastly, you can also load balance APIs across multiple OpenAI instances to distribute the load evenly. And on the right-hand side, there is a simple and sample architecture of using OpenAI with Azure API Management. In this use case, we are using Key Vault to securely store the key that communicates for communication between API Management and OpenAI, or you can also use Managed Identity. We are also using Private Link to secure OpenAI from direct communication from client applications, so that all the client application calls need to go through Azure API Management. So this is a lot of reasons why it's a good idea to use API management with OpenAI. But we also have many more new features coming to even enhance this scenario further and provide more benefits in the early 2024. So if that's something that you're interested in, keep your eye out. And we hope to announce some new capabilities in the first half of 2024 even better protect and let you manage and productize OpenAI APIs. So with this, I wanted to thank everyone for joining this part of the session and to listen about API management. There's 3 links here that you might be interested in. The first one points to offshore product announcements. The second one points to release notes for our service deployments. And the third one is the blog where we post articles about upcoming features.
Thanks, Mike. I'll add Julia to the stage as well, and Fernando, because I think there is like a couple of questions, and just to guarantee that any one of you that wants to answer can answer that. So I know Fernando was quite active on the. It was quite active on the chat, but there is some questions here that I think that people would wanted to hear more, and because we have those 5 minutes, let's go through that. I'll start with the one that was not being answered yet, and I think that's for you, Julia. Is that Sebastian is asking, just for understanding, it is possible to implement the principal propagation of the SAP with credentials, with the credential manager?
Yeah, awesome. Happy to take that one. So we currently don't support SAP as an identity provider. In case you want to manually set it up using OAuth 2, that's one way to do it. We are looking for this more further down the line to add SAP as an identity provider for Credential Manager.
Cool. I think that one is for Fernando, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is a question from Ruben. Maybe I missed it, but what is the advantage between Premium V2 versus Premium? I think you answered that on the chat, but just for everyone that pick up, because it's quite something that probably a lot of people is interested. You were on mute.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, it seems like my headset mutes every certain minute, so let me know when you lose me. Yeah, so the main advantage is that Premium V2 will have enhanced VNet injection. Traditionally, with Premium V1, when you want to deploy inside a VNet, you need to open network security ports and rules to our own dependencies of the services, Azure Storage, Azure SQL, logs, monitoring. And if the customers do not open this NSG ports, basically the service will not work correctly, right? So we give customers this option, but if they don't configure it correctly, the service works badly. So Premium V2 will fix all of that. All the internal traffic will run in a separate network interface. So VNet injection will be completely easier. That's why we call it enhanced VNet injection. I would say that's the main advantage. We have more things coming, but we will announce them as we get closer to a public preview of Premium V2.
I think it's also worth pointing out the improvements in faster scaling and provisioning times. So that's
yes,
very, very important as well.
Yes, of course. Deployment times will be lower, configuration times will be lower, also auto-scaling, scaling out horizontally, all those times. Basically, those are the benefits of the V2 tiers. Deploying API management V1 takes up to 45 minutes, 1 hour sometimes. Now we can take 5 to 10 minutes. So yeah, those are also big improvements. Yeah.
Awesome. Next one is I think is in relation to API management. What is the context that the Copilot have? I think the question here is like what he can access, what he cannot from the API management fabric when he's asking the questions.
Right, so Copilot works on the policy at the moment. So all the use cases are limited to the policies in your API management service, and it's also trained, of course, on the documentation for policies. So it's able to suggest you some, help or assistance, provide assistance in terms of policies, but not in terms of any other capability at the moment. So the context is, within the policies, public information as well as information that's specific to your service, where you can. It's more about contextual. It doesn't really know what's in your service. It's more about you being able to select, for example, like we showed in demonstration, a specific policy, and then basically pass that policy to Copilot for explanation.
Okay, and is on the policy that is open, or you explicitly pass that as part of the
Yeah,
prompt?
so this is just a user interface gesture, right? So by itself, I don't know. We don't have engineers who worked on this feature, but I don't expect it to be aware of like all the policies that you have in your API management service.
Cool, thanks, man. And then still related to Copilot is a bit of a question and a comment, right? Currently, there is no information about the pricing for that.
Right. So I don't think we are, the right team to talk about that. We are basically part of Microsoft Copilot for Azure. So in terms of availability, if you want to use our own Copilot, you have to get access to Microsoft Copilot for Azure, as well as the pricing will probably be the same for both solutions. We are just a component of Microsoft Copilot for Azure.